Welcome to Hey, it's Carly Rae's Book Club. This is Hey Lit Agent, where literary agents from all different agencies join me to chat about the literary process and reveal what makes a query letter stand out. I'm your host, Carly-Rae. Today, literary agent at Folio Jr John Cusick joins us to chat about the literary process. We'll find out what genres John represents, why he prefers to be an editorial agent, and whether he always wanted to be involved in the world of writing. We'll find out more right after this. Welcome, John. I'm so excited to have you on Hey Lit Agent. Tell us where you're joining us from.
I am talking to you today from my apartment here in lovely Brooklyn, New York.
Now, you are a literary agent at Folio Jr. Share with us a little bit more about your agencies and the clients you represent.
Sure. So I work with Folio Jr, which is actually a subset, a department of Folio Literary Management, which is a literary agency representing authors and material across genres and markets. So adult stuff, kids stuff, fiction, nonfiction, all kinds of stuff. But my focus has always been fiction in the Kidlet and YA space, and that's what Folio Jr focuses on. So I represent middle grade, young adult, and a little bit of what I'd call crossover fiction, new adult, some YA, some NA, new adult, fantasy and sci-fi, and some romance on that side as well. The sorts of authors I work with are folks like Joan He, who wrote The Ones We're Meant to Find, Laura Sebastian, who's the author of the Ash Princess series, and Julie Murphy, who wrote the book Dumplin', which is a movie on Netflix. So you can see there's sort of a cross section there between, very grounded contemporary realistic with Julie, some more high fantasy with authors like Laura, and even kind of speculative and sci-fi near future stuff with what Joan is writing. So those three authors are a pretty good spread in the kinds of stuff that I work with.
Yeah. Now, tell viewers what genres you love to represent and why having such a unique voice in a manuscript is important.
Yeah, so in terms of genre, I think most agents are pretty genre agnostic. So I try to have a taste for things in all kinds of different markets, whether or not that's like contemporary realistic romance or rom-com or, sci-fi, fantasy, something that's more speculative or cerebral or what have you. So all those different genres are genres that I love to work in, including like horror, historical. There really aren't too many that I don't like. But what I will say is that to your second question about the importance of having a unique voice or a unique concept to work in the YA space is simply that it's a very, very competitive market. There are many, many writers who want to be writing in that space. And similarly, there are many, many agents who are representing material in that space now. So these days, my feeling is that it's not enough just to have a good book or a competent or well-written book. Of all the good, competent, and well-written books out there, editors will pick the one that is the most unique, that sort of stands out in a way that others don't, that offers something new or a fresh take on an old idea. And so it's really about cutting through sort of the static to help your project be as breakout and unforgettable as possible. That's why sort of uniqueness is such an important element in the projects that we look for as agents.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your bio on Folio Jr, you say that you're an editorial agent. Tell viewers what that means, and if when you're looking for new projects to represent, you look for manuscripts that need a tad bit more of editing before submission.
Sure. So essentially what an editorial agent is an agent who anticipates spending time working with you on your projects before they go on submission. So when I take on a project, I fully expect that I'm going to be giving that author at least one or two significant edit letters. Now, that said, when I'm looking for a project, while I do expect that we're going to be editing it together, I'm still looking for material that is as polished and professional as the author can make it. I think the time to be querying your material, even if you're reaching out to an editorial agent, is after you have taken it as far as you can. You've maybe run it by beta readers or a writers group if you have access to that. You've taken it to the point where you're ready to do more, but you need guidance from an outside source. And that's when, I want to see the material. But that said, most agents these days, I don't say most, but a much larger number of agents these days than perhaps historically are now editorial agents. And it simply relates back to what we were discussing a moment ago, the level of competition out there. When I'm sending out a project, I'm sending something out that the author and I have worked very hard to polish to a high shine, to have, no visible flaws, no problems that the author and I can identify. And I fully expect that the other projects on each editor's desk have been given that same kind of care and attention as well. So you can send out stuff that's a little bit rougher. And of course, editors have the capacity to see something rough and to see the potential in it. But they'll then need to take that project, that diamond in the rough, and sell it to their boss and the sales team, and folks whose job is not to be a creative editorial mind and see where something is going to go. And next to that diamond in the rough is a project that is much less rough, that has had all the rough scraped off it. And then you ask yourself, well, which of those two projects is more likely to get an offer at that meeting? It's probably the one that's more polished. So that's sort of why I think the editorial agent has become a more prevalent feature in contemporary publishing.
Yeah. Now, is there one thing an aspiring author looking to query you can do in their query letter to catch your eye?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, like I was saying, a unique hook or concept is really important. And I think the best way to find your unique hook and concept is, first of all, to read very widely in the genre you want to write in. So if you want to be a YA author, I would expect that you are reading recent YA books, that you're a fan of the genre, that you're not, say, reading Alice in Wonderland or The Catcher in the Rye and calling that your comp. You're looking at stuff that was published within the last 3 years. You're very up on the market. You're invested in it because these are the books that teens are reading today, and the teens of today are your audience, right? So if you are steeped in the market, in what's working and what's popular, and in the way it's being done, the question is then to bring your own unique spin on these tropes and ideas and adventures and stories that maybe would start off as a more familiar idea, right? So if it's a question about, hey, I want to write a story about a kid dealing with bullying at their high school, well, that's interesting, but also I've read a million books that are just about bullying. What could make your bullying story more interesting? Well, I'm going to make it a story where all the bullies are vampires and all the nerds are human. So there's a power differential between vampire and human, and that's how we're going to explore bullying. Okay, well, now that's a slightly more interesting idea. It's a more unique hook. It's taking an old trope and kind of messing with it in a couple of different ways. So these are how you can kind of come to these more unique ideas that are just, they stand out more. And even as I said, this very silly idea about vampires, I noticed you smiled, and that's always my litmus test. If you can describe your idea to somebody and it makes them smile, even if it's not a joke or a funny thing, they just kind of go like, oh, you've got something interesting because it made you stop and kind of go like, oh, I don't know if I've seen that before. Like, oh, isn't that funny? Like, oh, cool. I'd like to know more. That's the reaction, at least the baseline that you hope people have when you're pitching a project to them,
Yeah. And I did just read Julie Murphy's If the Shoe Fits, which was a spin like on Cinderella. And it was really unique. And it was like one of my favorite books that I've read. So I definitely can see the like little hooks on there.
Absolutely. Those sorts of fairy tale retellings are really, really popular still. You'll constantly see them. Sometimes it's really obvious. It's marketed as this is Cinderella, but like this. And sometimes you look a little closer and you're like, oh, like this is Bluebeard, or this is, this other thing that's kind of been reimagined in this new modern way. So yes, definitely. That's a great way to come at an old idea in a new way.
Yeah. Now, with so many manuscripts to read and only so many days for you, how do you approach a new project when you're reading it for the first time? Do you look for the protagonist to stand out, like strong world building? Does the book kind of need to stay with you even when you're done reading?
That's a really good question. I think, there's kind of a few steps to the process. So first, I read a query and it has an idea or a pitch that I think sounds unique and marketable. Let's go with our dumb, vampire bully thing, right? So I'm like, okay, that's interesting enough. Let me read the sample, which usually will come with the query email, right? Reading that sample, I'm seeing just on the line level, is this a voice that I connect with? Now, everyone has their own unique literary voice. Some people are very their voice is very noticeable. It's really unique to them. Other people, their writing is kind of more transparent. You don't really notice them speaking in a particularly noticeable way. It's just, I'm just enjoying the story. Everybody is different. However, there are a couple of things that I think are unique to, say, the YA genre that are important in really nailing the voice. And I think that I need to see that line level writing is really sharp and pulling me in and is engaging and at a certain level of competence, right? Like if certainly if it's riddled with grammatical errors, that's not good. But I also mean, if the sentence rhythm is really clunky, or if there's a lot of cliches, or just isn't polished enough to really feel exciting, that might be a moment at which I'm saying, okay, I like this concept, but the voice isn't quite there. So the third step is you request the full manuscript and the concept is good and the line level writing is good. The question then is it all going to hang together in a way that remains compelling, through the course of the story? But that said, here is where I think as an agent reading, I'm going to be at my most forgiving, because if, like I said, the concept and the voice are there, the other problems that you might encounter at that stage are plot level problems usually. So the pacing is too slow, or the character arc isn't really clear, like what the character needs to change or how they're changing isn't really clear. These are the kinds of things that could potentially be fixed with an edit. Right? Like I can go and say, I love what you're doing, but it kind of goes off the rails here a little bit, in my opinion. What do you think if it went back this way? Or, what do you think about tightening this up? So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about as I'm reading the project. I think I know it's a winner if I'm already writing my submission list as I'm reading it. So if I'm reading something and I'm thinking like, man, Alessandra Balzer at Balzer and Bray would just love this, or Christian Trimmer at MTV Books, man, he's been looking for something like this, or even, hey, this editor I know has never told me they're looking for this, but I just know their taste. I know what they love to watch on TV. Like I know their sense of humor. Like they would just love this. And I think being that kind of advocate and super fan for your clients is like the agent's job, right? It's like you've watched something on Netflix and you just are obsessed with it and you have to tell your friends they have to watch it and you won't leave them alone about it. It's that, but for books, right? For your client stuff is like, man, this was so good. I loved it so much. Like, Kendra, Alessandra, Christian, whoever the editor is I'm talking to, I think you got to see it. Like, you're just going to love this when you read it. That's the energy you want to bring to a submission.
Well, there you have it. You heard John talk all things literary. Stay tuned, because when we come back, we'll find out if John always wanted to be involved in the literary world. Welcome back to Hey Lit Agent. I'm your host, Carly-Rae, here with literary agent John Cusick. Now, John, walk us through a day in your life as a literary agent. Are you very organized, or how do you go about your day?
Sure. So the way I organize my day has changed a little bit over the years, but I will say currently I have something in place that I really like and I've been trying to stick to. So first of all, I really love the quote. I'm not sure who said it originally, but it goes, "Make before you manage." So anything that is somewhat creative or using that kind of top-down thinking, so that is reading a manuscript, writing an edit letter. I do a degree of creative development with some clients. So anything that's sort of artistic in that way, and I would say editing and evaluating manuscripts falls under that umbrella, I do first. And I will wait until, maybe 11 o'clock in the morning until I open up email, because once that conversation starts, there's inevitably, sort of anywhere between 25 to 50 problems that I need to solve in any given day, from a client, from an editor. As an agent, it's your job to keep things moving and to keep things working. So when something doesn't work, it always comes down to the agent, the agent to at least start the process of fixing it, right? So before I get into that kind of management stuff, I do the creative, I do the make. As the management stuff goes on, it's a lot of correspondence. It's a lot of, hey, publisher, did you make sure that you sent this check when you should have? Hey, author, your editor is asking after this revision. Are you going to send that in on time? Kind of keeping things moving. And then in the afternoon, that's typically when I'll have phone calls. So if a client is going over an edit letter with me, we'll do that over the phone potentially. I might be on the phone discussing a client's next project with their current editor, or I'm meeting with an editor or team of editors to kind of learn their taste. You know, in the pre-pandemic days, we would go out for coffee or lunch usually. But these days, what's more common is just a phone call or a video call to hear about their taste, to hear about what they're watching on TV, what they think is funny, like all the stuff that helps inform what submissions I'll send to them in the future. And that's usually sort of towards the end of the day. But because each day I might be working on a different kind of edit. Each project is at a different stage in its life cycle as a book. So every day is very different. The problems you are tackling every day is very different. But more or less, that's the trajectory I kind of try to keep to as the day goes on.
Now, I'm curious, did you always want to be involved in the literary world?
So I worked as a permissions assistant for my college's like university press. And basically what a permissions assistant does is if someone wants to use a quote from one of your books, they have to call you and say, hey, can I use this? And are you going to charge any money to use it? And I was the person they called, and I would kind of fill out the forms and do that. And even though that work wasn't very exciting or romantic, I was immediately like, hey, the business of books is interesting to me. Now, what I wanted to be was a writer, but I knew that that wasn't going to pay a lot of money, at least not initially. So I was looking for something that would kind of help me afford that habit, right? And being in the business of books, like where better place to learn how to be a published author and how to be a successfully published author. So I sort of backed into it that way. And I'll say that the first person who gave me a job in publishing, not for lack of my trying. I mean, I interviewed everywhere you can think of. But the first person to give me a job was Scott Trammell, who was a literary agent, and he needed a personal assistant. And I wasn't necessarily looking to be a literary agent. I didn't even really know what a literary agent did at that age. But after working with him for a couple of months and getting to know the Kidlet world, he was a Kidlet agent exclusively. I sort of started to realize two things. One, Kidlet is a great place to be. It's the most progressive corner of pop culture that you're likely to find. A. B, it's people who work in Kidlet are very passionate about books for kids, and I think that that's a great thing. But then the second thing was agenting specifically was a good fit for me. I thought I wanted to be solely an editor for my job. But I realized that a lot of editing is part of the agenting job, but also being an advocate for authors and being the bad cop on occasion and arguing for what you want. These were things that I didn't feel I was a natural at when I started. And so I wanted to explore those parts of my personality. So agenting was kind of like John, stop being a wallflower writer and like get out there and talk to people and have a bit of a personality. And it was good for that. So that's kind of how I found myself in Kidlet and agenting specifically, though I did come to New York kind of thinking I do want to do something in the book biz, Yeah.
Well, you did recently release a middle grade book called Dimension Y. Did you always want to write in that genre? I know you mentioned Kidlet, but what inspired you?
So that wasn't the idea to begin with. I came out of college writing very pretentious, kind of stuffy, white guy literary English major stuff. And Scott, my boss, when I was first working for him, said, "Hey, listen, I know you want to be a writer. Ever thought about writing YA? Because I could help you get, if it's good, I could help you get published." And that's exactly what happened. I did 2 YA books with him, Girl Parts and Cherry Money Baby, back in the early aughts. And then more recently wrote a pair of middle grade novels, Dimension Y, How to Save the Universe Without Really Trying, and then the sequel, Dimension Y, Revenge of the Sequel, which are both like very, very silly, very Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, kind of funny sci-fi. Which is a lot of fun. So I probably wouldn't have written in the Kidlet genre if I didn't work there first and sort of learn about it, get an aesthetic and appreciation for it, kind of come to love it on its own terms as an adult. And I'll also say too that if you want to be published, there are few things smarter than trying to work in publishing, because you make these connections, definitely. Like, because I knew Scott, I had a personal connection to an agent who gave me more of his time than he would have if I were just some rando. But more than that, I learned more about how to tell a compelling story from Scott and from editing books for publication than I ever did as an English major. Because an agent is really thinking about, is this story affecting the reader the way you want it to? Is it compelling page to page? Is it making you feel these big emotions? Like, the agent usually isn't really bothering with, like, is your metaphor about post-industrial Russia coming across? Like, if it is, great. But more importantly, is it a compelling story? Do I care about the characters? That was a writer education that only the business of book publishing could really give me. And I'm so glad it did, because now I'm so passionate about those things. I think that's such an important and vital part of storytelling. But there was definitely a bit of a cultural change in my head, going from being like a very pretentious English major to a very not pretentious literary agent who really has much more of a passion for actual books and storytelling than maybe I thought I did when I was younger. Yeah.
So now, if there is one thing you're always looking for when acquiring new client authors, what is it?
Well, I've talked a little bit about like genre and uniqueness. So I'll say, in terms of what I'm looking for in the person who is the actual writer, I think there are certain qualities of personality that make it easier for you to succeed as an author. And probably the biggest one is a degree of flexibility. Publishing is a rough business. And the reason why there are literary agents like me is that it's not really set up to take care of an individual writer. Publishers, your relationship with your editor can be amazing and lifelong and personal and intimate. But the company they work for is CBS, News Corp, Viacom, who do not care about creative people at all. So it can be a bit rough on the ego and on the feelings, and can require pivoting. I thought I wanted to do this, but that didn't work out, so I'm going to try and do this instead. And I think creative people who love to create and can create in a lot of different ways and just love the work and love the process and are able to kind of revise and roll with criticism and whatnot. And this is easier said than done. But if you have that element of your personality, you'll go farther, because you'll be able to roll with kind of the lumps that come inevitably with just working in a business, right? So when I'm talking to an author, with an eye towards potentially representing them, I want to see, do we have a rapport? Do they seem like they're open to this kind of work and talking about writing in this kind of way? I'm very practical and unromantic when I talk about writing, so do we connect on that level? And if those things are checked off and I love their project, well then, yeah, that's definitely someone I want to work with.
Well, John, thank you so much for joining Hey Lit Agent. Before I let you go, tell viewers where they can find you on social media.
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter. My handle is John M. Cusick, like a middle initial, Michael. And it's the same handle on Instagram, at John M. Cusick. Those are my two social platforms for publishing. And you can find me on there all the time.
Well, there you have it. John's handles are in the description below. John, thank you so much for joining Hey Lit Agent. And for those watching, I hope you have a great day.